right, let's start. So we're on page 67, chapter 7. The life of the church. Why do we have to go to church? Modern people often ask, why does it matter what particular church I go to?
There she is.
Hey, Hala, we're just starting. Page
Okay,
67.
good. 67,
Yeah.
thanks.
Why do we have to go to church? Modern people often ask, why does it matter what particular church I go to? And why do I have to go to church? Why can't I just pray and worship God on my own, at home or wherever I am? Such questions make sense if you view going to church in a non-sacramental way. From that perspective, going to church generally means listening to inspirational music, attending a lecture on the Bible or related topic, perhaps performing some formalized actions that have religious symbolism, and then retiring to another room for snacks and socialization. While the content of such lectures or socialization is usually spiritual, in practice, these kinds of churches are more like a combination of a social club and a political party. Like social clubs, they organize community events and collect dues in the form of tithes and contributions. And like political parties, the primary thing that gives them their identity is agreement with a set of beliefs, especially the pastor's beliefs. While these things can be good, they are not the primary focus of church in a sacramental view. Sacramentally, the purpose of attending church services is to participate in a higher spiritual reality. The divine liturgy. How is it possible to participate in a higher spiritual reality? As we've seen in a sacramental view of the world, nothing is just physical. Objects and actions have intrinsic spiritual meaning. Everything is participatory. If you dress up as a superhero, for example, you're participating in that character's spirit, and you can have a certain effect, perhaps an inspiring effect, on other people. You're able to do this because by dressing up as that character, you are in a sense borrowing that character's energy. This is why masks are used in many cultures as a way for people to participate in spiritual realities. In Japanese cultural festivals, for example, people often wear masks depicting various demons or spirits, and by doing so, they are able to participate in the energy and meaning of those entities. This makes sense when you think in an enchanted sacramental way. If the physical and spiritual can't be separated, then imitation is always participatory. Let's contrast this to the way modern people think. Because modern people don't see any necessary connection between the physical and the spiritual, we think we can imitate something physically without any spiritual implications. Even if someone puts on a mask of a god, we would say, it's just a mask, or it's just pretend. But in a sacramental view, because the physical and spiritual are inseparable, to imitate something physically is also to imitate it spiritually. You can't participate in something physically without also participating in its spiritual meaning. It makes me think of, like when they, in the movies, when they do a wedding or they do a baptism or something, but they're not really doing it. Sometimes the actors themselves report feeling like
moved.
Moved, or like something doesn't fit right because it's not real, like it's interesting because they are really participating in something without being fully aware of it,
Do you think that's why like little kids like to play pretend?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. We should become like little children, right? The same thing can happen in a church service. For sacramental Christians, church isn't just music and a lecture. It's a different kind of thing altogether, what's called a liturgy or mass in the West. A liturgy is a kind of group performance wherein certain physical actions are taken together that have specific spiritual content. You might call it a group ritual. The goal is to imitate and therefore participate in a spiritual reality through the physical ritual. And the spiritual reality that sacramental Christians are trying to imitate through their liturgy is nothing less than heaven itself. One of the things we know about heaven from the Bible and the writings of the saints is that there seems to be a kind of angelic liturgy constantly being performed around the throne of God. What this means exactly isn't entirely clear, but it seems there is a grand cosmic order to reality that resembles a dance or musical masterpiece. If you look at the huge and beautiful dance of the planets in our solar system or in the galaxies at large, it's easy to see a rhythm to the universe. A sacramental way of looking at this is that the stars and planets are not just lifeless balls of gas and rocks, but are, or are governed by, angelic powers. There's a reason all ancient cultures viewed the planets as gods. And we know from the Bible and the writings of early Christians that they understood the angelic powers as being physically involved in the order and harmony of the created universe. The Old Testament recounts how God taught Moses this spiritual reality and also how to participate in it. God instructed Moses in correctly building a temple with an excruciating detail and performing a liturgy on earth that imitated this heavenly cosmic liturgy. The early Christians, who were mostly Jews, inherited this knowledge and built their liturgy on it. The liturgy used in sacramental Christianity today is a continuation of the very same liturgy that God taught Moses. This is why sacramental Christians call their liturgy the divine liturgy. To participate in it is also to participate in the exact same cosmic liturgy that the angels perform around the throne of God. This participation links the earthly and the heavenly liturgy and means that when you step into a sacramental church space that's correctly imitating the heavenly liturgy, you are stepping into a small bit of heaven itself. You are participating with the angelic powers in a higher spiritual reality. So when we open the liturgy with blessed is the kingdom, we say that the kingdom becomes present then in the church with the divine liturgy. We open the kingdom, we're participating in it already in the kingdom that's beyond time. Because of this, the liturgy has a kind of timeless, eternal quality. Some people describe this as being outside of time, but it's better to say that in the liturgy, all time is present. This means a few things. First, it means that all the liturgies that have ever been performed are really the same liturgy, since they all equally participate in the one cosmic liturgy in heaven. When you participate in the liturgy, you are, in that moment, participating alongside everyone else who has ever participated in the liturgy all throughout history, because all of them participate in the same eternal present. That's a good line there. So we're participating with everyone who's ever participated in a liturgy. And you can think about that, especially for those of us who aren't converts, who have family, it's a way that you can connect with all your ancestors even. It's a beautiful thing.
I remember in Memphis,
Yeah.
we, when a new priest arrives, you want to make them feel very welcome. So we ended up, what would you like, Father? And he wanted the new chalice of patent. And it was fine, but I'm thinking, and I'm not from Memphis, so it wasn't as big a deal to me, but I'm thinking, well, the old one was worn, but that's the same one somebody's grandmother and great grandmother took communion from, so that connection sharing of the cup.
Yeah.
We're sharing the cup universally too, but in that context, it was, I think, more meaningful if you had family there, that you're. I think they ended up donating it to another church, but we did replace it, and it is beautiful, but I had mixed feelings about it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common feeling, especially when people who've been in the church a long time, changing anything seems difficult.
It becomes difficult for people, and it doesn't hurt me, it doesn't become difficult. I think about it a lot, and I try to think back on what those before me would have thought and wanted, and it kind of lets it go.
Yeah.
But some people, people are human, and they have to hold on to things, and sometimes it's that material candlestick or the communion cup or whatever.
It would be different if us Greeks didn't like to put our name on everything. We'd church, be a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Especially where we sit in church.
Well,
stand it.
Second, communion, which is at the center of the liturgy, also has this timeless quality. Jesus is a man with a physical body, but he is also the divine Son in the Trinity. He too exists eternally, and so everyone who takes communion is eating the same thing. If you take communion today, it's the same communion your fellow Christians took in the 12th century in Russia, the 8th century in Greece, or the 1st century in Judea. It's important to be clear about this. It's not that Christians attend many different services in many different places, all of which they call liturgy, and eat many different meals, all of which they call communion. That is thinking only physically. When you think sacramentally, when you see the physical and spiritual as the same, You understand that even though the church buildings and the bread or wine are physically different at first glance, their participation in the cosmic liturgy and the body of Christ means not only that their spiritual content is the same, but that their physicality in fact becomes the same as well. This creates a radical unity among Christians. All sacramental Christians in all places and all times participate in the same eternal liturgy. And we all participate in the same meal that puts the life of the one and only Archie into us. The language St. Paul and the early Christians used for this is that when we participate in the sacraments, we have put on Christ. Paul talks about that a lot, putting on Christ or being in Christ. We have in fact become Christ, and in doing so, become a real living part of the Archie. This reality connects us across all space and time much more profoundly than can mere agreement or social association. You can see how this act of divine participation is totally different from a non-sacramental view of church. The non-sacramental view is primarily about education and socialization. While these can be beneficial, and while there's no reason people can't have beneficial spiritual experiences in these contexts or in any context, the goals of these two types of church service are not the same. Only in the divine liturgy is the goal to imitate the cosmic liturgy of the angels and thereby participate in a higher spiritual reality. I think that's why COVID kind of brought this to light. I mean, where the Protestant churches, I think, adapted much more easily to going to live streaming because really the only thing that was missing was the socialization. But for us as Orthodox, it was much more fraught, the whole discussion about whether people could be in the liturgy or how many people, et cetera. And because it's not the same thing, really. I mean, during COVID, the bishops kind of wanted to assure people that it was okay and kind of said, well, it's the same thing, but it's really not the same thing as being there. You know, especially because of the physicality of being there. Taking communion.
And I know streamlining has a good purpose, but
Yeah.
I still think it's got a bad purpose to it.
Yeah.
It keeps us away when we should be there engaged in the community, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I did like, we actually watched our priest in North Carolina. That first Sunday that churches were shut down in Tennessee, or our church was shut down, and they had all of their streaming services set up years before that, so it was fantastic. And when I watched it, I just cried because I was like, wanted to be there, and not that we even lived there, but just seeing Father Paul Christie do that, I was so moved. But I also was in my robe, sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
No, I think the first week we did try to get dressed, and then after that, I was like,
Yeah.
with like coffee in hand, like it wasn't church, it was church. But I was very separated from it,
Yeah.
petting our dogs, drinking coffee, pausing it, just.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very different, but you could see how if you were watching a Protestant service, it wouldn't really be a big deal to pause it or, drink coffee and be in your robe, because you're getting the same content, right? But for us, it's so much different.
And our kids actually graduated from a massive Baptist church. That's where they held the graduation for the public schools. And in their auditorium, there were cup holders.
Huh.
So they did take,
Oh, yeah.
They had a Starbucks
Yeah,
coffee.
yeah, the coffee shop.
and
The narthex.
well, before you go in and as you could go in, you could get you a coffee. Every seat had cup holders. Yeah,
Maybe that's what we can do for
$7.
stewardship.
You took the words out of my mouth. $7 a cup, that'll increase
There you
stewardship.
go.
And all participants have to buy one after communion.
Someone else want to read liturgical time?
Liturgical time. Part of the answer, therefore, to the question of why you can't just worship at home or pray wherever you are has to do with what the liturgy is. While it's good to pray in your home, or anywhere for that matter, the liturgy has to be done in a particular way in order to correctly imitate the divine cosmic liturgy and thereby participate in it. But the liturgy isn't limited to a particular church service you attend. It's not as if you go to church, participate in the divine liturgy, and then leave and go about the rest of your week as though you had your spiritual day on Sunday and the rest of the days are normal. Sacramental Christianity is not just about doing a particular set of actions, it's a whole way of life. One way to describe this life is as participation in what the church calls liturgical time. The church has what's called a liturgical calendar, which includes all the special feast days and fast times of the church. In the West, Christmas and Easter are the most famous of the major feast days, while St. Patrick's Day and St. Valentine's Day are perhaps the most famous saints' days. But in fact, every day of the year is dedicated to some particular saint, event in church history, or fasting period. Like the secular calendar, the church calendar has different seasons throughout the liturgical year. And these different seasons and feast days are commemorated by changes in the way the liturgy is conducted. Participation in the liturgy, in other words, also means participation in the whole cycle of liturgical seasons throughout the year. It is important to understand that these seasons and holidays, holy days, are not just remembrances of the past. When you celebrate a secular holiday like President's Day or the 4th of July, what you're mainly doing is remembering some event that happened a long time ago. But all times are present in the liturgy. So while the church might technically be remembering a past event, such as the life of St. Patrick or the birth of Jesus, sacramentally, what we're doing is participating in it directly in the present. On Easter or Christmas, we don't say Christ was risen or Christ was born. That would be the normal thing to say if all we were doing was remembering the past. Instead, we say Christ is risen and Christ is born, because we aren't just holding memorials of these events, we're participating in them now through the eternal present of the liturgy. I know Trey wants to read so bad. He told me before.
Grayson is a good reader. Yeah.
Okay, that was.
It wasn't, he told me before, he wanted to read this.
I-
Oh, wait, you didn't?
He said, I have.
Oh, I'm gonna read a paragraph. I thought you said you didn't wanna read.
No, I
You
can
did wanna read.
No,
I kinda
no,
did-
you said it
I
right.
do wanna read that. He's gonna read now.
I'm sorry.
You want me to read?
Stand up and read.
No, I can read, I'll finish it.
We all put it down.
That's all that. Wait a minute, he wants to read.
Everybody's like, poor Christine,
I'll take the.
the life of the church. You can now see why going to church in and of itself is not the focus in sacramental Christianity. It's as though mere church attendance makes you a Christian. It's not as though mere church attendance makes you a Christian. That's how secular things work. You sign up for something, go to meetings, and that's what it means to be a member of that thing. But to be sacramental is not merely a matter of attendance, nor is it merely about thinking in a certain way or performing certain ritual actions. It is a lifestyle. All worldviews, if taken seriously, turn into lifestyles.
That's really interesting. I mean, and we talk about that a lot when we try to translate the word faith. You know, Father Mike and I both like to point out that it really means faithfulness is how it should be translated. It's not just an intellectual assent. It's a faithfulness to what you believe. Because I believe this, I'm going to act in accordance with what I believe. And so therefore, if you believe something seriously, it will inevitably turn into a lifestyle. We were talking in an earlier meeting this afternoon about who is a member of the church. This is interesting that the secular way of thinking is that you sign up for something, you go to the meetings, and that's what it means to be a member. But in the church, there's a different way of thinking. It's expected to be your whole worldview, your whole lifestyle is really what makes you a member. Anyway, thank you.
In the case of sacramental Christianity, going to church and participating in the sacraments is about living out the idea that the physical and the spiritual are bound up together, and that you encounter them together through participation, not just in church, but in everything you do and are. Everything in life is like this. You don't, for example, become a member of a family by going to a specific number of family gatherings at a certain frequency. And then once you've fulfilled your quota, you qualify as a member of that family. That would be a weird way to think about it. Rather, you become a member of a family because that's who you are. That's the life in which you are an active participant. Neither do you automatically achieve the status of healthy by going to the gym a certain number of times. What makes you a healthy person is that you built up an entire lifestyle of being healthy. You can't become healthy by sitting at home and reading a lot of articles about health. You don't become a member of a family by skipping family gatherings in order to sit at home, looking at pictures of past family events. If you want to be part of something, you have to live it. Asking, why do I have to go to church is like asking, why do I have to go to family gatherings? Their answer is, of course, that you don't have to do anything. But if you want to become something, you have to participate in it. And in sacramental Christianity, the thing you're participating in is the higher spiritual reality of the RT himself.
So yeah, when we talk about being in Christ, this is what we're talking about. If you want to become something, if we want to become Christ-like, you have to participate in it. In other words, participate in Christ and through the liturgy, through communion. All right, now who wants to read chapter 8?
Think I do.
Oh, wait a minute now.
Now they're fighting.
The Bible in the church, how to read the Bible. Where does the Bible fit into all of this? We've established that the Bible is not the source of Christianity and that the life of sacramental Christianity does not consist primarily of studying the Bible, but of participating in the sacraments and the life of the church. That doesn't mean the Bible has no place or even that it has a lesser place. On the contrary, the Bible is read in every liturgy and in all the other services of the church. It informs how church temples are built and otherwise saturates the whole life of the church in more ways than you can count. In fact, it has been said that Christian life cannot be understood outside the imagery and language of the scriptures. How then should we understand the Bible? Let's start with what the Bible is not. The Bible is not a scientific or historical document in the particular sense that modern people mean this. It's important here to distinguish between truth and fact. Facts are those things that are objectively verifiable. The boiling point of water, the diameter of the earth, and so on. But even though facts are verifiable, as we saw previously, they contain no deeper meaning. Truth, on the other hand, includes facts, but goes beyond them to encompass the deeper meaning of reality itself. As modern people, we tend to care only about facts. For the ancients, however, the truth was of primary importance. Facts were important only insofar as they served truth. This is why the Bible is seemingly full of contradictions at the factual level. The gospel accounts, for example, contradict each other frequently. The order of events, such as Christ's temptations in the wilderness, or what is said by the thieves crucified with him, is different depending on which gospel we read. Why? Because the authors were making different kinds of points or had different emphases when writing their accounts. And they moved the facts around to support those points. This does not make the Bible unreliable. This was a universally accepted writing practice in the ancient world, but it's baffling to modern people because we privilege fact over all the other categories, even over meaning. So what makes the Bible holy? It's certainly not, as some people believe, that the Bible is a book of foundational, absolutely true facts about the world, and that its holiness is a guarantee those facts are correct. There are plenty of mistakes and errors in the Bible that have been thoroughly documented. Muslims, for example, often attack the Bible from this direction, pointing out the many manuscript variations and textual errors. But both the Muslim critic and the fundamentalist Christian miss the point here. The Bible is about truth, and truth is higher than fact. The factual is only one level of what has always been understood to be a multi-level text.
This reminds me of this book I'm reading right now about, it's by this psychiatrist who talks about the right brain and the left brain, the different hemispheres. His argument is that since the Enlightenment, basically since the Enlightenment, that in the West, we have become very dominated by the left brain, which is what I would say is dominated by facts. Whereas the right brain sees things more like a gestalt. It sees things in a bigger picture. It's the right brain is what interprets metaphors, and it sees more truth, right? So I think that's interesting that they're actually two different things. But if we were to rely a little bit less on our left brain and instead go back to, appreciating what the right brain can give us. We can see the truth come, I mean, Jesus told stories, for example, and gave parables and metaphors. So, and he conveyed not facts with that, but truth.
And the truth, the right brain, in my opinion, also helps you see the beauty of things.
Yeah,
It gives it color, life, beauty,
yes,
love, yeah.
that's a
Where
good
the
point.
factual side,
Very
that
analytical.
it's too analytical, if it doesn't add up or multiply together and,
Right.
it causes chaos.
Mhm.
Why do you think the left brain became like more valued in the West?
I think in the rise of science and technology, we became more and more efficient at things by using the left brain to invent and to, yeah,
Mm. Yeah.
that's his argument anyway.
Mm.
It's interesting.
I'm just thinking like, in Eastern culture, there was still that like, people invented really great things, but still, had more of that leaning toward the right brain. So like, what was it within humans that like started to shift toward like, oh, this is really valuable and powerful? I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it seems to me like when I reflect on my time living in Greece, it seems to me like in Greece, the culture relies more, a little bit more on the right brain. It doesn't, whereas we tend to be very, like just for example, law and order, if a sign says don't park here, we don't park there. Or if a sign that says $250 fine and you park there, you better believe you're getting a $250 fine. Whereas in Greece, they'll be like, yeah, that's the ideal, not to park there, but
Let's park anyway.
I'm just going for 5 minutes and there's no other parking. Yeah. All right, Sarah?
3 levels of interpretation. From the very beginning, ancient Christians recognized 3 levels of biblical interpretation: the literal, the moral, and the spiritual, what they called the typological. The literal level of the text is what the text says, literally, the plain meaning of the words. In the story of David and Goliath, David was a shepherd who accepted the challenge of a huge Philistine warrior in the midst of a particular historical situation. He was famously outmatched, but went in confidently anyway and emerged victorious. As you can see, the literal reading of the text is pretty straightforward. The moral level consists of the lessons we can draw from the text or what the text is trying to teach us. A fairly standard moral lesson you can draw from David and Goliath is have faith in God and he will save you even when you seem outmatched or overwhelmed, though there are certainly others. These 2 levels are generally easy to understand, but the 3rd level, the spiritual or typological, was considered the most challenging and advanced level of reading. Let's start with typological. It's a fancy sounding word, but all it means is that this way of reading is about seeing types in the text. A type is when one thing, an image, character, object, etc., stands for something else that has a deeper spiritual meaning. A typological reading of David and Goliath is that David is a type of Christ and Goliath is a type of death, the devil, or both. Just as David conquered Goliath and broke the power of his enemies, so too Christ conquered death through his resurrection and broke the power of the enemy of the whole world. This is what you might call the deeper truth of the story of David and Goliath. The story reveals itself as a kind of historical foreshadowing, what the early church fathers called a prefiguring of Christ's victory over death and the devil. If you're familiar with the epistles of St. Paul, you'll recognize that this is how he interpreted the Old Testament. Paul realized that the books of the Old Testament were not just about the history of the Jews, but were also full of deeper spiritual meaning about Christ, the church, baptism, the Eucharist, and the sacramental life. The early fathers of the church followed Paul's interpretive lead and continued to delve into the riches of this deeper way of reading the text, opening up a whole treasure trove of previously unrecognized meaning in the scriptures. It's important to understand that typology is not allegory in the sense we mean it today. In a modern allegory, we understand that the characters and other elements of the story are entirely fictitious and their purpose is simply to be the vehicle for whatever point the author is trying to make. But that is not how a typological reading works. A passage from the Bible can be true at the literal level, the moral level, and the typological level all at once. That is, certain things may have happened in actual history, but they are also profound images and types of spiritual realities. Remember how the enchanted world works. Things in the objective physical world, what we would capture with a literal reading, have real spiritual meaning, what we would capture with a moral and typological reading. It's not one or the other, it's both. Things that literally happened in history can have spiritual cosmic significance because the entire physical world also has spiritual content. Other times, however, a passage might lack a literal meaning. The early Christians believed that while the whole Bible is true, not all of it is fact. For example, was it a historical fact that God created Eve out of a literal rib taken from Adam? Maybe or maybe not, but what's more important than the factual details is the profound truth this teaches us about the nature of men and women. When Genesis talks about how woman was made out of man's rib, while at the same time all men are born of women, the point is about the true relationship of the sexes, namely that they are not separable, but are intrinsically, physically a part of one another. Another famous passage critics often point to is Psalm 137:9, which reads, "Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." If you take only the literal meaning of this passage, it seems to endorse murdering babies. But of course, this is an important example where we need to go past the literal level of the text. The traditional interpretation of this passage is that it does not have a literal meaning, only a moral or typological one. It's about taking your sins and killing them in your heart while they are infants, before they grow up and take over your soul. Perhaps this seems like a crude Bronze Age image to a peaceful society like ours, but the spiritual message is nevertheless true. You should cut off a vice or sin while it's still in its infant stages before it has the chance to become a deep-rooted habit or addiction.
So the typological reading is the right brain reading, it seems like, yeah.
I think, didn't the Jews have 4 levels?
That's a good question.
I'm pretty sure. Yes. I'm trying to remember what the 4th level was. I knew it was
Moral, ceremonial, maybe.
maybe,
Yeah.
I can't remember.
It might be tradition.
Yeah.
Tradition.
Kelly's right.
Acquiring the mind of the
Oh,
church.
well, that's just the point.
But how do you know which passage in the Bible have literal meanings and which don't, or which have both? How do you know what the correct typological meaning is? Most people would say that, as with any book, you need to read the book in its proper historical and cultural context. And that's certainly true enough. But the higher and more profound context is the spiritual context of the Bible, namely the church herself, that is, the family of historical Christianity. The early Christians, and those Christians today who are directly descended from them through apostolic succession, are the ones who are most qualified to do this interpretation. There are many reasons for this, but the most basic one is that the family is generally the most qualified to interpret and understand its own history. Because I am part of my family, I not only am familiar with its history and its life, but I also know the people in my family personally. If you were to read my grandmother's diary, there would no doubt be a lot that you could understand and follow, but there would be many things that you as an outsider would not understand. And because of this ignorance, you might not even realize when you were misunderstanding them. But I, who knew my grandmother personally, would be much more qualified to read and interpret her diary. It's the same way with the Bible. To really understand the deep spiritual meaning of the text, you need to be part of the family of the church and steeped into its life. When you are, all sorts of profound meaning becomes available that you couldn't see before. This process of being steeped in the life of the family is what sacramental Christians call acquiring the mind of the church. This does not mean agreeing with the doctrine or memorizing Bible verses. That's all you did. You have an abstracted, overly intellectualized religion and would never get much beyond the literal level of interpretation. What it means to acquire the mind of the church is to treat Christianity in a particular way. When you're part of that family, you all share a certain family spirit. You think you feel the same way together. When you've acquired the mind of the church, you have a sense of what's an authentic part of her life and what is not. rather than a set of intellectual checklists. Not that there's anything wrong with the intellect, but having a sense or instinct for something is a sign that it's gone past the level of intellectual agreement and become a part of your being. You see this with people who have become experts at sport, a skill, or a game. My grandmother rarely used recipes when she cooked, not because she disapproved of them, because her expertise was so deep-seated that it had become instinct, to the point that she didn't even need measuring cups in certain situations. She knew how much of an ingredient was needed just by looking at it. Likewise, in sports or games, expert players report that some of their best plays didn't come from perfect calculation, but from instinct. Not instinct as a random impulse, but instincts that are trained by thousands of hours of practice of getting a feel for the game. You can acquire a spiritual instinct in the same way. You can immerse yourself in the life of the church, participate in the higher reality of liturgical time, and partake of the sacraments. Just as with practicing a sport, when you do those things enough, you acquire the mind of the church and you can think as she does. This is why the Bible and the church have to go together as two things handed down to us as that are inseparable. To really read the Bible with the mind of the church requires that you have a certain kind of formation, not just intellectual, but spiritual. And just as you can't really understand the Bible's true depths without participating in the life of the church, so too, the whole life of the church is crafted out of the imagery from the Bible. People think that ancient churches relied heavily on music and paintings because most ancient people were illiterate. But this was the main reason. This was not the main reason. The main reason is that the life of the church is inseparable from the imagery of scripture. In the liturgy, the Psalms are sung and chanted in the same way the Torah was chanted in the old Jewish temple. The walls are adorned with images from the biblical narratives. And the form of liturgy itself calls people to participate experientially in a spiritual reality using all five senses. You see and touch the iconography, you smell the incense, you hear the chanting, and you taste the communion. The Bible, in other words, is not merely read or memorized, but lived and experienced. Or, to put it another way, being reconnected with the arche is not something you do not only in your mind. It's not something you do only in your mind. It's a new kind of life, and it must therefore be lived.
So, yeah, we tell catechumens, yes, we have catechism class and so on, but the most important thing is to show up, to be in the services. That's how you can acquire the mind of the church. Some things just, even if you're not maybe biblically literate, there are some things that just seem wrong to you if you just lived the life of the church. There are some things that seem right and seem wrong because that's what's been, you've by osmosis, you've gathered this sense through lived experience.
You're letting the scriptures shape you
Yes.
instead of reverse.
Yes, yeah, good way to put it. All right, chapter 9, Cosmic Revolution. Oh, Hal, you wanna read?
Me?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll read.
all right, chapter 9.
In order to understand the ultimate purpose and destiny of humanity in a sacramental view of Christianity, we have to address one of the main problems people tend to struggle with in their religious thinking, the problem of evil and suffering. Every worldview has had to make some sense of this reality, that we live in a world which contains much that is good and beautiful, but also much that is wicked and ugly. The odd incongruence classically called the problem of evil is one reason people have argued that there is no God. The problem is expressed in many forms, but the most common one is, if God is supposed to be all loving and all powerful, why does he allow evil and suffering in the world? Excuse me. The idea is that if God is loving, he would not like to see his creatures suffer. And if he is all powerful, surely he would be able to do something about that suffering. So the fact that there is suffering and evil in the world seems to be incompatible with the existence of a good God or a God at all. There are two answers to this problem. The first is that if you say evil exists at all, this implies a real rather than merely personal standard for morality. In other words, when you call something evil, you're not simply saying that the thing is inconvenient or unpleasant or that you don't like it. To call something evil is different kind of claim. It's an appeal to a real universal standard of right and wrong, what is classically called the moral law. The moral law denotes something higher than anyone's preference and kind of utilitarianism, or even the consensus of a culture, human flourishing, or evoked altruism. Or you wouldn't like it if someone did that to you, or we all agree on these values. Aren't cases for absolute moral values and duties, only circumstantial reasons that we don't approve of certain behaviors or that such behaviors are counterproductive to the goals of our society. If there is a moral law, on the other hand, that means there are moral truths in an absolute sense. At the highest level of reality, without an absolute moral law, all moral statements break down into something like that kind of behavior is counterproductive to such and such agenda. Even if that agenda is to reduce suffering, it's still a relative value and not an absolute one. That's pretty deep, Father.
Yeah,
That is, yeah, can you expound on that? That's. really-
yeah, I was kind of chewing on that one myself. Let's see. In an absolute sense, at the highest. Almost. Yeah, I guess it's making a claim for absolute truth, for truth with a capital T. Rather than what's common in our time of, my personal truth. So yeah. If there's not an absolute truth, absolute moral law, then basically everything is just saying I don't like this kind of behavior, or it's counter to my agenda.
Or it's like truth. The scriptures give you the truth, and then when you try to you give meaning to the scriptures, you're kind of not showing, you're showing that you don't really believe. I don't know. That's hard to think about.
Yeah,
I
maybe
think.
he'll unpack it a little bit.
Maybe Christine can unpack it.
I don't know, I think it's just packed.
Yeah,
Just gonna leave it for a while.
we have to chew on this one.
Yeah.
But thanks for pointing that out, that I can help.
I'm trying to bring everybody into communion.
So, to me,
There we go.
You got it now.
what we think of as suffering, and that suffering being evil,
Right,
is not truly evil.
right.
That's
That's a good point.
what he's saying.
Yeah, good point.
What did you say? Say it again, please.
Like when people make the claim that if people are suffering somewhere, there must not be a God, because how would God allow evil? That suffering truly isn't evil in an absolute, not in that absolute sense. It's, I've always thought of it as a dichotomy, like there can't be. You can't have good without bad, you can't have,
Right, yin and yang.
you can't have faith without doubt. Like if it was clear, that God exists and Jesus was here and he died for our sins. If that was a fact and he was walking amongst us, and
Right,
then everybody would believe it. It's easy to believe then, right?
right.
So I think it's the same sort of thing here. There is an absolute truth, but what we happen to think, whatever the events of the day as being evil, maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Right. What were you gonna say, Hal?
Well, I was going to say, does it, we all can do, I actually lost my thought, Father. I'll bring it up if I think about it.
Alright. Maybe he'll help us unpack this.
Well, and the suffering too.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. Free will. I mean, we have free will, And maybe the
Yeah,
will is where the evil comes in,
yeah,
so that people that do evil, they do it of their free will, and it's against what morally is something good to us.
yeah,
And our sufferings too are like, in my opinion, fighting evil. I mean,
Yeah.
grateful to be able to try to fight, and grateful for what it helps you strengthen yourself to become
yeah.
from
It's part of our
yourself.
growth.
Part of our growth.
Sufferings,
That's
yeah.
what easier, it's really a lot, it's really part of our growth, and you start seeing, it's like, I thought I had it bad, but look over there, look in that
Right.
corner,
Look
and then
at
you
Trey.
Yeah.
Oh, poor Trey.
And coming out of the
Like
other
there,
end
but
of
the grace of
suffering.
God go I, or something like that. Like when we go to the firehouse shelter, I say that to myself all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Coming out of the other end of suffering is always growth.
That's
That's always, you're always finding something at the end of that suffering that you didn't realize until you got there.
Yeah.
and that's when you show that you're grateful for that it happened, and you were the one that was lucky enough to experience it. That may sound weird.
Suffering also helps create spiritual encounters in your life. It does for me.
yeah.
We're unpacking, so.
I don't disagree with George.
Oh.
Christ walked among us, it would be the same as it was before.
There still would be people
People would hate him, or
called,
wouldn't believe him.
right?
It would be,
Fake.
it wouldn't be just, we're no different than those people.
Right,
We are those people.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
We are those.
amen.
And then on suffering, personal suffering is different, but like children that are abused, I mean, like,
yeah,
that's what I, like, that is evil.
Yeah.
There is real evil in the world. And that when someone talks about that, it's not just, minor discomfort of like traffic or you don't get paid enough. It's like
right,
horrific stuff.
right.
And that's not that I agree with them saying there's no God, but that, I think that's like the broader,
Yeah, yeah,
We can definitely see evil in our world today. All around us in different areas, different aspects.
Yeah.
It's a visual.
I think he unpacks it, I read ahead a little bit, I think he unpacks it in a couple of paragraphs.
All right,
That's so-
Hallie, keep going.
Great conclusion.
Okay. The only way you can have a moral law by which you can say that something is really evil, as opposed to merely unpleasant or counterproductive, as is if there's a moral reality that is higher than and independent of all our opinions and preferences. To put it another way, there can only be a universal moral law if there is a universal moral lawgiver. That is an absolute source for goodness, which is exactly what the archy is. This is why the claim that something is truly evil implies an ultimate moral reality. If real evil exists in the world and is identifiable as such, that means there has to be an ultimate or absolute moral standard for reality. The existence of evil, therefore, is actually an argument in favor of the existence of God, not against. Wow.
Interesting, yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking of the paragraph before when he was talking about the universal moral law, I always think of, my father-in-law at his church in Washington State, he had a parishioner who became a deacon, who was a, state, congressman, in the, assembly for Washington State. And my father-in-law asked him one time, I guess after they had passed some controversial laws, he said, on what basis are you guys making these laws? Which is a great question. On what basis are you making these laws? Because, Washington, as you know, is a very secular state, so they're not using the Ten Commandments or anything like that for sure. But without that, then it's just everyone's opinion, right? Without having the Bible or the church or the Ten Commandments or something from a universal moral lawgiver, then there really is no universal absolute truth or moral law.
That's something to go
It
off
seems
of.
like to me some of the laws don't aren't based in Christianity. I mean, it's one person's opinion of this is wrong because I don't think it's right. I mean, like, I mean,
Right,
and that's what gets to me. They say they're Christians, but yet they don't choose to show the love in Christianity that God showed or Christ showed,
yeah,
in my opinion.
yeah, I hear you. All right, let's keep going.
I forgot where I left off. Is it the top of the page?
Yeah,
Where there does evil, sorry, where then does evil come from? This gets us to the second answer. The Christian answer is that evil has its source not in God, but in free will. Well, I just said that, Father. Um,
yeah,
God gave his Christians freedom because freedom is necessary for love. We all know that if you force someone to love you, that isn't really love. Love requires freedom, but if people are truly free, they also, by definition, have the freedom to do bad things and to hurt each other. Then there aren't two things about it. Either people are free or they're not. And if they're free to do evil. Think of a small child. You tell it not to touch a hot stove, but it exercises its free will to do so and gets burned. Tying the child's hands behind its back might take away the possibility of getting burned, but it also takes away the child's freedom. In the same way, if God wants to allow free will, he has to allow for the possibility of suffering and evil. For many people, these two answers are sufficient to show that the classical idea of God is not incompatible with the existence of suffering and evil. Likewise, the consensus of philosophers and theologians over the centuries has been that these answers definitively show that there is no logical problem of evil. No atheist in history, to my knowledge, has ever provided a good refutation of these answers, despite the sometimes extravagant hypothetical situation people come with people come up with to try to show otherwise. However, the majority of people, whatever they say, are not really bothered by the logical problem of evil. Most people are bothered by what we might call the emotional problem of evil. An all loving God permitting the existence of suffering and evil doesn't sit right with us in some way that's difficult to articulate. It definitely seems there's something missing here. The explanation about free will is satisfactory, but a robust answer to the problem of evil and suffering needs to be more than a refutation of the logical problem of evil. You want me to go on?
yeah.
Missing piece is, I think, our response to the reality of suffering. Unfortunately, the response of many modern Christians to the problem of suffering has been underwhelming, to say the least. The worst thing I've heard people say is something along the lines of, this is all part of God's plan, meaning that God uses suffering or evil to accomplish his goals. Though this may sound nice, it's actually a horrible thing to say. While it's true that God can turn evil and suffering into good, evil cannot be a part of God's plan because that would make God the cause of evil. God would therefore be either evil himself or else beyond good and evil in such a way that he would be amoral. In either case, we could no longer be talking about the archy. Most people don't say this sort of thing, of course. They'll instead phrase it as God permits evil and suffering because there's some greater good he can achieve through suffering. Our role is simply to endure the suffering and have faith that God's going to work everything out in the end. There are some elements of truth in this answer, but it's still problematic. For one thing, it has the wrong emphasis. If taken the wrong way, such an attitude threatens to make Christianity into a religion of blind obedience, intellectual disengagement, and passivity. As you might expect, the early Christians had very different response to suffering, had a very different response to suffering.
Well, now I'm intrigued what the Christian response is.
Mhm.
All right, let's read a little
I
more.
can read it.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
the Christian response. If the modern Christian response is something like put up with suffering, then the ancient Christian response could be paraphrased as transcend suffering. The idea is that all the suffering and evil in the universe can ultimately be overcome. I'll give you an example. Very young children appear to suffer immensely from things that are trivial for adults. If a toddler becomes tired, most often he will begin acting out, crying, melting down, picking fights, or generally becoming cranky, depending on the child. The child's pain leads to bad behavior because he cannot handle it. On the other hand, a mature adult, for example, the child's mother, has the ability to be tired without being undone by the experience. She can endure the pain and fatigue, or pain or fatigue better because of her maturity. She might say, oh, I'm fine, I'm just a little tired, whereas the toddler might instead throw a tantrum. The difference here is one of maturity. The adult has the ability to be bigger than any particular suffering that might seem to cause unbearable agony to a child. And even among adults, there is a spectrum of maturity. More mature adults can endure more. They don't complain, throw tantrums, or lash out. It's not that they've eliminated suffering. They still feel tired or experience pain. It's just that they've become bigger than their suffering. The ultimate picture of this is Jesus. Jesus was essentially tortured. Look up scourging if you want some idea of the intensity of suffering, and then killed. Yet the pain did not undo him or even embitter him. During the ordeal, he famously said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. But more astounding than this, Christ was not even defeated by death. He came back from the dead, and in doing so, overcame death itself. Ever since then, there has been a whole procession of men and women who followed Christ's example of heroic confidence in the face of suffering. It wasn't something they put up with, but something they transcended. There are perhaps no more poignant images than those of the martyr saints in the early centuries of Christianity who were murdered for their faith. Saint Paraskevi, for example, was boiled alive in oil, but was miraculously unharmed by it, and then released by her astonished persecutors. Saint Lawrence, while being roasted on a hot, how do you say that? Gridiron, far from being undone by the pain, was reported to have taunted his tortured by saying, turn me over, I'm done on this side. Oh my God. Numerous saints have appeared to people throughout history, giving advice and insight or working amazing miracles. Even in centuries after their deaths, there have been cases where the bodies of saints miraculously smelled like perfume or incense, rather than rotten decay after they died. Some have even resisted decomposition for decades after their deaths without any form of embalming or preservative. Such miracles bear witness to the human person's ability to participate in Christ's overcoming and conquering of death and evil. This is the point of Christianity is making. Being connected to the arche means you are plugged directly into life itself, making you so alive that you become bigger and stronger than all the suffering and evil, even stronger than death. The courage of the saints, their inability to be broken by torture, and their conviction that even death could not take the ultimate life away from all witnesses to the core idea of sacramental Christianity. That no matter how terrible the wickedness of evil, suffering, and even death appear to be, these things can and will be transcended utterly. People generally have one of two reactions to the picture of Christianity. One is to find profoundly beautiful. And if that's your reaction, then you can have begun to understand what Christianity it really is about. But the other reaction is to find the whole thing ridiculous or detestable. It's absurd, you might say. To compare something like enduring the concentration camps with a toddler being tired. Being in concentration camp is real suffering. Creating them is real evil. You can't get over real, explicit adult suffering the way a child grows up and learns to control his emotions. To even suggest this, you might say, trivializes real suffering. To this, I would like to say two things. First, why not? We know that suffering isn't supreme power before which we are utterly helpless. There are stories from all over the world and all throughout history of people enduring and overcoming profound suffering for the sake of a greater good. I gave the examples of the martyred saints, but even in our own age, there are people who have not only survived terrible experiences, but have become better because of them. They have had spiritual insights, written books, and even achieved something resembling an enlightenment experience precisely because they were able to face suffering and evil and transcend them. Indeed, monks across the great religious traditions voluntarily subject themselves to unnecessary pain, hunger, sleep deprivation, and other hardships in order to have the opportunity to grapple with suffering and overcome it. And even at the everyday level, the stories that most resonate with us tend to be about people who have experienced and overcome great hardship, becoming better people than they were before. I have to stop here. If I don't sleep, I get so grumpy. I'm such a weak person. Like, I'm thinking about all this pain and suffering, and if I don't get sleep, I'm just,
Yeah. You can't transcend it.
You haven't seen the black eye?
I mean.
Certain physical stuff you can't transcend.
Right.
Certain physical, there's a lot of physical that you just can't.
But I guess what the monks are doing is training themselves.
Sure.
To, yeah.
I think
like, when my kids were little and I didn't sleep, you just get used to so little sleep. And now it's like, if I'm up, we rescued these two little puppies and I was up making sure they were out, and I mean, I don't know, I woke up so grumpy.
Yeah.
And I think about what these saints go through and,
Yeah.
okay, I'll keep
a
reading.
lot of suffering is a part of life that we have to go through and deal with.
Yeah.
Things like Paul's thorn in his side, he dealt with that. The Lord had that there for a reason,
Yeah.
to keep him focused on what different reasons we all say. But, that there's just certain things in life, when you dig in deep spiritually, you're gonna deal with stuff. You're gonna deal with stuff that you haven't dealt with.
What would be an example of enduring suffering or transcending suffering? Like, can anyone think of a practical example of?
If your
The difference.
father-in-law lives with you and he's a big responsibility, I'll say,
Yeah.
this is not my,
You know, your personal experience.
well, not directly, but you can either be bitter about it and let it ruin
Right.
99% of the time that you're awake, or you can, I don't know, it is like you gain virtue.
Yeah.
If you treat him with respect and care,
Yeah.
even though,
Well, that's a good one.
To transcend is to get above, is to be to overtake,
yeah.
to overcome.
Kind of like professionally or in interactions with others, if you're belittled or insulted and you feel very defensive, like you have to come back at it.
Right.
Whereas if you have greater peace about it, you just let it go.
Yeah.
The higher road. Yeah, I don't think the higher road often enough.
How living with me.
Yeah, I'll second that.
There you go.
Transcending
heard
above is- I think transcending above is not allowing it to affect you
Yeah.
deeply is a big part of it, not allowing it to control you.
Yeah.
And control your actions. You know, you cause and effect. We don't want this to create an effect.
Right.
You give suffering.
Like most times when stuff like that happens, like I'm gonna do whatever I'm gonna do anyway. Whatever they're saying really isn't gonna
Sure.
affect my actions. It's like if they insulted my being or something by raising that point. I'm like, well, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
Or like,
So you transcended the insult.
well, no, I think I need to. I think
Yeah.
like whatever they say really sticks and stones. Like whatever they say can't really hurt you because it really is not gonna affect the way you approach what you do on a day-to-day basis or.
Right.
Isn't it though, and I've heard this, that you should be able to take a compliment or an insult at the same
Yeah.
level. You shouldn't get
Too high or
so
too low.
Prideful.
prideful or so defensive. Whatever someone says to you, you can just let
Yeah.
it wash over you.
There's a famous story, have you heard this?
I'm wondering if I'm thinking,
From the Desert Fathers where this,
oh, yeah,
the monk, he goes to the grave and throws stones and insults the grave, and then he goes back and praises the grave and throws flowers, and the elder asks him, how do you react? How do you react? He's dead, he didn't react one way or the other. So that's how we should be.
that's exactly, I think what I was
You're
connecting
thinking of,
that to,
yeah,
I condensed it to that you just, yeah, whatever it is.
yeah,
And Kelly, what you said too, I forget what you said, but I was thinking it's, accepting things the way they are.
Sure.
Whatever, I think that's how we transcend stuff, just,
Not allowing them to control you.
yeah. That's how it is, you can't do anything about it. Someone's not taking good care of their health, you can see the trajectory that they're on. You're not in control, they're in control, God's in control, and you accept it, whatever it is, you can't, I'm not God, I can't fix it, I don't know better than they do. I know what I would do, but I don't know what's best, so.
Accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change
Yes,
things you
isn't
can.
that the prayer of
Yeah.
Saint Francis of Assisi? Isn't that the prayer of Saint Francis of Assisi? To change the things you can, and accept the things
I
you
think
can't.
you're right. Yeah, I think you're right,
Difference between the two.
yeah.
But I
That
always
the
thought that was
understanding.
personal, like about yourself, but I think it's in general, right?
Mhm.
Cause I always thought that prayer was about, except the things about myself I can't change, or the things.
Yeah,
But I think it's
Yeah.
like a view of outward
yeah, I think you're
too.
right.
Elevated up.
Mm.
Out and
So
up.
you're saying you think that's personal to him about the things that he can change or can't change about himself?
Oh, no, I was just saying, I used to think that. It could be that way. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I've always seen it as things in general, to be able to accept what you can change and know that the things you can, change what you can and accept the things that you can't. But I mean, I don't know that that's the proper interpretation. That's just always the way I've interpreted it. What do you think, Father?
Yeah, I agree with you, like, I have to accept that I can't change Hala, she's gonna be Hala, so I need to accept that.
I third,
You're implying there's something not right about me, though, Father.
I think we want you here in person to stick up for yourself.
But
Okay,
now,
I said maybe you should come in person next week to stick up for yourself.
being out at night is just not my thing anymore.
No,
Yeah,
I get it.
Seems to be doing a pretty good job right there.
should we,
She is.
should we stop, it's late, should we stop here and pick up next
I
time?
vote yes.
Yeah.